Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hardware News Recap of the Week. In this one, we'll be talking about the ASUS corrosion issues in one of its water-cooled motherboards. It's a story that features EK as well. We'll also be going over AMD's plans for 3D stacked DRAM, not just V-cache. So instead of just SRAM, they're looking at moving other memory to the CPU as well. Really interesting topic, super future looking, as they don't have a product with it yet. But it is the direction that they want to go with enterprise and data center initially, and then probably to consumer eventually. Additionally, we have news of a Gigabyte RTX 4090 box. It has its own power supply. So now you can get a separate, basically, computer for your 4090 to live in, and then you plug it into your other computer. It's an eGPU. These have been around a long time, but this one's kind of interesting. And then finally, a bunch of Xbox Live games coming to PC via GeForce Now in an odd partnership between Microsoft and NVIDIA. Let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lian Li's O11D Evo case. The O11D Evo is a mid-tower that tested well previously with us and is most interesting for attention to fine details and its unique features. One of those is the easy-to-use invertible layout. The O11D Evo inversion process is the easiest we've ever worked with on a case, allowing it to flip entirely for a unique upside-down build or work as a standard layout. The O11D Evo has 2 chambers for the system and the power supply, support for up to 9 storage drives, and edge-to-edge glass for a showcase, while still offering excellent airflow through side and bottom intakes. Learn more at the link in the description below. Up first, we're going to be talking about the corrosion issue. If you haven't seen it, there were a number of posts on Reddit. These date back 4 months, but it got more spread recently as more people were finally starting to develop some issues in their motherboard water blocks. And this is related to an ASUS VRM block corrosion problem where the ROG Maximus Z690 Formula motherboard uses an included EK Cross-Chill 3 VRM water block, and pairing the two causes galvanic corrosion. For the time being, ASUS is offering either a full refund or replacement to customers who reach out, as they stated in their public blog post. But ASUS's public reaction kind of left a lot unexplained, and so we did a little bit more digging on it. So the things we do know officially, ASUS itself says that the VRM uses a new electroless nickel plating process. So rather than doing standard nickel plating, what they're instead doing is a purely chemical process, so no electricity involved. If you're curious how any of this works, we have factory tours of factories that do electroplating, and you can check that out on the channel. But this is a chemical process, and the problem with this is that the nickel plating is plating aluminum and not copper. Probably the rest of the loop is copper, and inside the VRM block there are also copper components. So this means that metals are at risk of being mixed if the nickel plating is imperfect, or if there's a problem with the electroless process in some way. That's where this issue is coming from. And running, just as a reminder, anyone who doesn't know, running an AIO, you don't run into this problem because with AIOs, you have typically aluminum radiators, and you have copper microfins and cold plates in the block, the pump block housing. The reason it doesn't happen there, you don't get this level of corrosion typically, unless you're Enermax or MSI or sort of Arctic, but they fixed that. Anyway, the reason you typically don't get corrosion in AIOs is because they're using a propylene glycol mixture, where the standard distribution is about 20% propylene glycol to the remainder being basically distilled water. Anyway, looking around at images online from users, you'll see that the VRM bridge, that's the name of the component from EK, will corrode with time as a result of the mixture of aluminum plating and copper cooling components that are part of the bridge. The bridge itself is, again, EK branded as a product, but it's ASUS that's driving all of this. And even though it's basically ASUS's fault from everything we're seeing, from our opinion, EK is the one that's making the most public effort to reach customers. And they're not even EK's customers, they're ASUS's customers, and ASUS dragged its feet in reacting to this issue or offering a solution, which it is now sort of doing, but once again, EK is going through the extra effort of emailing people who bought the VRM bridge so that they know they're reaching them, rather than we'll just post it on the ASUS website that absolutely no one ever checks unless they need drivers, and hope that people who bought this thing see it. So anyway, and just to answer the obvious question here of, well, how would they reach customers if it's sold through a retailer? Typically what you'll do is contact the distributors or suppliers and try to get a message out to customers. Amazon has a built-in feature for that. Newegg has done stuff like that in the past as well. Anyway, so EK has raised some attention to the matter. We noticed, interestingly, that the EK Waterblocks logo on the ASUS block isn't even the most current one, which made us kind of curious and wonder if the company even had a real level of involvement, because certainly EK wouldn't volunteer to put an old trademark on a new product. But when we talked to EK, they were a little cagey about answering. So our speculation here is that there are contracts in place that may benefit ASUS more than EK in this partnership, and that would explain why EK is the one that's trying the hardest to get word out about the problem. Now, normally EK's products that use aluminum will very clearly state as much. So they do a pretty good job, like with the Fluid Gaming line, of saying, don't mix this with our copper stuff. It'll be a bad time, and we're probably not going to help you if it's your own fault, and we marked everything clearly. This one doesn't have that marking, though. So it's strange that there wasn't any warning here, and once again, we come back to, well, it's an ASUS product. Probably ASUS is conducting the train. I was going to say driving, and then I was going to mime driving, and I was like, that probably doesn't, I don't think that's how trains work. So they're the ones conducting the train for the motherboard here, and the whole thing's just kind of odd. But the story is not new. As far back as 4 months ago, users on the water cooling subreddit were beginning to report the issue. Neither ASUS nor EK made a public statement until a more recent post to the same subreddit, which is what spurred EK into action. EK's email statement to customers noted that both companies are aware of the issue. They say that ASUS is preparing a new VRM heatsink for the board, and users of the Z690 formula should reach out to ASUS for support for more information on when updated parts will be ready. EK also noted that it will help its own customers with the damaged block due to incompatibility. Now, unfortunately, customers also may have combined ASUS's kit with non-EK brands water cooling, and in those instances, since the other brands have nothing to do with the ASUS product at all, you're gonna have to go talk to ASUS to get some kind of compensation or something for potentially ruining your other components that are in the loop, because you thought the loop would work with them because ASUS did not properly mark that it could be a mixed metals concern. So that's the update on all of that. The story's closed out in the sense that we know it is in fact a problem. It's confirmed. ASUS confirmed it. They have refund and replacement options in place. EK has replacement, refund options in place, or at least replacement for new kit. And that's kind of the start and the end of it. But if you've been asking about it, there's your answer. AMD FSR. This one's pretty interesting too. So AMD's released version 2.2 of its FSR upscaler, Fidelity FX Super Resolution. We've tested FSR in the past, but what they're doing now is a little bit different in that they have released to the general public some of the source code for FSR functionality, and this is through the GPU Open project. According to AMD, the 2.2 release contains a specific improvement for what it calls high-velocity ghosting artifacts. It says that these are common in racing games, for example. You'd see this in situations where the player's car is basically stationary relative to the screen, but the scenery and other objects move at a high speed. This has resulted in ghosting artifacts in the past, but FSR 2.2 is supposed to fix that, and it's already in Need for Speed Unbound and Forza Horizon 5. AMD's GPU Open post for the release has a few side-by-side screenshots with sliders that'll allow you to see the difference between no FSR and FSR 2.2 quality mode, and AMD's own YouTube video for FSR 2.2 shows gameplay for Horizon 5 with a side-by-side comparison of no FSR versus FSR 2.2. The high-velocity ghosting mentioned isn't present here, which is the main point of the update. We tried to find an example in AMD's previous FSR 2.1 comparison video, but the example game, Farming Simulator 2022, moves a lot slower, as you might notice in the footage. Personally, I'm looking to Farming Simulator 2022's sequel, Right to Repair Your Tractor Simulator, voiced over by none other than Louis Rossmann. So I actually really want that game now. So Louis, if you're watching, please reach out to the Farming Simulator people and do some voiceover. There are other improvements noted in AMD's post as well, like improved temporal stability for less flickering on some of the objects. This release of the latest version of FSR as open source means that you'll see these improvements in a wider range of games in the near future, not just the handful of games where AMD collaborated directly. And notably, AMD will also be releasing an FSR 2.2 plugin for Unreal Engine for direct integration for the many developers who just use Unreal Engine. Up next, NVIDIA's Posterchild game lacks NVIDIA features, but also there's some updates where they have DLSS added to more things. So we're going to come back to the headline for this one in a second, the quick recap of the newest news. So with AMD's FSR announcements, NVIDIA also has something to say and has sprung to posting it. NVIDIA announced that it has added DLSS or deep learned super sampling to 7 additional games, and it noted presence of reflex in 6 additional games. So the games for DLSS that were added include Atomic Heart, which we're going to come back to because I have a bone to pick with that one, with NVIDIA specifically, but that has DLSS 3. Blood Bowl 3 has DLSS. All the rest of these are not DLSS 3. Hello Neighbor 2 has DLSS and ray tracing. Hi-Fi Rush, DLSS 2. PlanetSide 2, which, okay, I guess we can put DLSS on that. That has it now. Returnal is DLSS 2 enabled. Sons of the Forest, and then Wanted Dead. Now, coming back to Atomic Heart, this is the one that we have a bit of a bone to pick with because Atomic Heart launch, which is coming out basically now, depending on when this video goes up, that game reminds us of when NVIDIA first announced RTX hardware. So the RTX 20 series, we were at their announcement event at Gamescom. It was 2018, and when they launched the product, there were no RTX games. It was something like 55 days. At one point, we had like a board in the background that was like days without RTX, basically a days without incident board, and it was as high as 50 something at that point. So they skipped on the initial support for the namesake of the new product, and they had this new thing where you couldn't use the technology that it was being advertised against. Atomic Heart was part of that. So in 2018, Atomic Heart was used as they're going to definitely include ray tracing in this title, and then they told us again somewhere around 2020 or so, as the 30 series neared, and then they brought it back again in about 2022, where they were basically like, hey, you remember Atomic Heart that we talked about 5 years ago? Well, if you bought your 20 series card, on the back of that announcement and advertisement, you can finally play this game with your 5-year-old video card that was advertised as being like part of this game's launch. That game is finally here, but the Atomic Heart launch actually does not have ray tracing. That's the best part. It's not just that they're 5 years late, the developers that is. It's not like NVIDIA is making the game, but they did choose to advertise it as this is why you should buy a 2080 5 years from now. But the game doesn't even have ray tracing, so that's really the downside here. Anyway, the choice to push it that hard and then just it doesn't even have the feature, it makes the whole 2018 situation look even worse back when there were no games coming out with the feature that it was named after. So moving on, NVIDIA also has some reflex updates. So they're adding reflex to 6 additional games. Reflex reduces total end-to-end system latency in playing a game. We tested it in the past. It actually does work, and it works pretty well. So it's a good technology. They've added it to 6 things, and those are World of Warcraft, which NVIDIA reminds us is available now, and for the last 20 years. Deliver Us Mars, Dying Light 2, Stay Human, Hi-Fi Rush, Hitman, and Perish. Up next, AMD took the stage at ISSCC, or the International Solid State Circuits Conference, which is actually the front runner for Best Conference Named Definitely by an Engineer awards. The presentation for AMD was over an hour long. There's a lot of general background information. If you've kept up with them, then you don't need to see most of it. But the most interesting segment was future-looking, and it was new information. So although the new technology from AMD is enterprise-focused, it's not consumer-focused, it doesn't come down to what we're all doing yet, AMD does have a pretty good track record for its B2B technologies coming into the consumer market. So this one is related to DRAM stacking, where they pose a couple of ideas. One of them is, and it's important to note these are ideas, they're theories, but they talk about an option of having DRAM on top of the interposer. So you would have an interposer with the CPU, the compute die, potentially HBM, things like that all together. Or they have another idea of packaging DRAM vertically on top of the HBM modules that are adjacent to the compute modules in a packaged CPU solution, basically. AMD is currently working with Samsung to research on-die DRAM, and the company stated this, quote, What we've demonstrated so far is SRAM stacking on a compute die. There's been a lot of discussion putting processing in memory. As a processor person, Dr. Lisa Su said, that seems a little counterintuitive. But it makes a lot of sense if you think about it from a system standpoint. There may be some processing operations that can be inserted into the memory, because with some insertions of algorithms in the memory component, you can reduce the overall access energy by up to 85%. Now, the slides in its presentation suggested a new approach to processing in memory, where some kernels would be capable of being executed within memory. AMD's block diagram of a theoretical CPU again illustrates the HBM module on the package and flanking the CPU, something that it's already doing in the server space, but with that additional DRAM bank stacked on top of the HBM module. Another image illustrates memory layers stacked on top of compute layers, or an alternative of memory layers stacked on top of an interposer that houses both the compute dies and the memory. AMD made an interesting point in its presentation about the direction of processors. It said, quote, "The package is sort of the new motherboard. You used to take all these pieces from different vendors and put them on a board. Now what we have to do is ensure that there's a way to put these pieces in a package." AMD also noted that it wants to standardize chip-to-chip interfaces, so going forward they can maximize performance and multiple vendors can work together instead of redeveloping proprietary interfaces repeatedly. Up next, ASRock has a new Blazing Quad M.2 card. So ASRock is releasing an updated version of a Quad M.2 riser, basically. They call it Blazing Quad M.2 card. It's very literal. If you're not keyed into ASRock marketing speak, we did some research, and blazing actually has a meaning. They've actually mapped it to a real technology that exists and renamed it. Blazing means PCIe Gen 5 M.2 slots, whereas Hyper, also ASRock terminology, means PCIe Gen 4, and Ultra means PCIe Gen 3. ASRock's made a couple of these cards in the past, and they're all fundamentally the same. The card reroutes the PCIe connections from a full by 16 slot on the motherboard to 4 M.2 connections on the riser. This probably means that the motherboard needs to support PCIe bifurcation to allow one slot to address multiple devices like this, but we aren't totally sure about that since we don't have one of these in hand. PCIe 5 SSDs can put off a lot of heat, that's evident. I mean, if you look at the Gigabyte SSD we talked about last week, it had a massive heatsink. And in this instance, the heatsink has real fins and dual fans that are powered by a motherboard header. This is a step up from the previous versions of the card, which only had a thin metal shroud to sink heat and a fan with dubious placement. Now, this type of card, it doesn't give you hardware RAID capabilities. You could still set up a RAID with this, but you would be setting up a software RAID. For hardware RAID, you would need to buy something else. So it's sort of the same as if they were connected all to the motherboard directly in this sense. It's just it rises it off the board, which could be useful for certain things. Now, the official support list for Blazing Quad is pretty short due to the fact that ASRock doesn't have a lot of boards with PCIe 5 slots at this point. In fact, most of the boards listed only show the card as being able to work fully in the first PCIe slot, which is where you would normally install a graphics card. And now, Video Cards with the Z has new pictures of a rumored Gigabyte RTX 4090 box. This gaming box, it's water-cooled like the previous version, which was a 30 series gaming box. It's an external GPU enclosure. And for those of you who were happily memeing about needing a dedicated power supply just for your video card, your meme has been fulfilled. It is now reality. There's a dedicated power supply for the 4090 in the box. Most of the I/O is on the back of the box, where the display out ports sit along with two USB Type-A ports and an Ethernet port, and that can provide network access to the host PC. If you're wondering why there's an Ethernet port, this could be useful for, say, a laptop that might not have its own Ethernet. The box connects via Thunderbolt, as is usually the case for external enclosures like this, and it's the source of the main Achilles heel for external GPUs. Both Thunderbolt 3 and 4 are limited to a maximum bandwidth of 40 gigabits per second. This is only slightly better than PCIe 3.0 by 4, and that limitation will hurt the performance. Thunderbolt 5 should double this to 80 gigabits per second in the future, but it's not here yet. The idea for external GPUs like this is you'd connect it to a laptop, almost like a docking station, to have big GPU power while at the desk. And then you'd be able to use the same PC somewhere else without the GPU. It's always been a cool idea, especially as people who travel a lot. We could see a potential use for that. For us, the challenge normally becomes logistics, which is you don't want to check your expensive GPU, but carrying it on is kind of problematic for other reasons. But there's potential for external GPUs depending on what it is you do. Like if you have 2 locations you spend a lot of time in, maybe it makes sense to just have a laptop and have a docking station at your work site or your home site or whatever. All right, last one. Microsoft and NVIDIA have struck a 10-year deal to offer Xbox PC games, kind of oxymoronic as it sounds, on NVIDIA's GeForce Now gaming service, which is their cloud-based service. So for this includes games such as Halo, Minecraft, which is already a PC game, but okay, and if Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard is successful, Call of Duty. And no, we're not sure what year it is anymore either. It's like we're perpetually stuck in 2009. Minecraft, Halo, Call of Duty. We've done it. All we need at this point is StarCraft 2 and then some dead game memes, and it'll be complete. We've created the summoning circle for a decade ago. Now, in addition to first-party or obvious titles like these, Xbox PC games that users already own via the Windows Store, Steam, or Epic Games Store can also be streamed via GeForce Now. However, the publisher has to actively choose to grant NVIDIA streaming rights to that game. So it doesn't, as Jensen Huang says, just work. NVIDIA also took this opportunity to pitch its support for Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, saying, quote, "The partnership delivers increased choice to gamers and resolves NVIDIA's concerns with Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. NVIDIA is therefore offering its full support for regulatory approval of the acquisition." NVIDIA, frequently known as the company that is concerned about choice for gamers, in its recent series of announcements known as pay $900 or go f yourself. Also the company that tried to buy ARM and then was shot down after all the posturing about how it would definitely be allowed to buy ARM, and concerning every other company in the entire industry. So anyway, Microsoft's trying hard to ward away government and industry pressure against the Activision Blizzard and Microsoft deal. And in some regards, GeForce Now is it's a competitor to Microsoft's Xbox cloud gaming service, but maybe this market is not big enough yet for them to really care about that. And they're looking at it more from a perspective of a rising tide raises all boats. But it could sink them too, I guess. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching as always. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly if you like this reporting. And we'll see you all next time.